I'm Todd Heaps, Vice President of Operations at Conservice. I've worked in the utility billing and management industry for the last 12 years. Along the way, we've learned valuable lessons on how to best manage utilities for our partners. Here are 8 steps on how to lower your utility bills. The reality of utilities is that it involves a lot more than simply gathering and paying bills. Errors or omissions can be really costly, and they can be large in dollar amount. You need to make sure that you're entering the data accurately for budgeting and energy benchmarking purposes. You also need to make sure that the bills are accurate and on time from the utility provider. You need to make sure that you're on the right rates. With better utility management, utilities can cost less and be easier to manage. The 4 primary objectives of our conversation today are A, to learn about industry statistics on provider trends, B, how to save even more money, C, ways to reduce costly errors, and lastly, to learn about avoiding late fees. We've broken those objectives up into 8 steps to clearly define how you can lower your utility bills. Your first step in the process is to track utility bill arrival dates. Utility bills go missing all the time for various reasons. In order to make sure you're not missing any utility bills, there's a couple key things you want to watch out for. Those points include the bill date for each bill. Storing the bill date on every bill processed allows you to know the cadence on when a bill is going to be processed and when to expect that bill in your hands. Understanding the frequency of each account will give you an idea of how often to expect the bill. Also, it's helpful to know when a bill is due. The due date allows you to know around what time the bill is due each month. Late fees can be costly. This is a really helpful way. If you really have your tracking of these utility bills dialed in, it's a great way to avoid late fees. Step 2, retrieve bills. A common pain point we see with our partners is the tracking and storage of paper bills. Oftentimes they're storing them in file cabinets, and if they ever need to search for an invoice, it's nearly impossible to dig through those file cabinets and find the bill that they're looking for. So creating digital copies of that paper mail really cleans up the process and makes it much easier to query invoices and have historical reference points for your bills. One thing we've found really helpful is to get as many as you can through eBill. Reason being that allows you to get bills much quicker than waiting for them to come through the mail. The bill images are cleaner. Oftentimes you're able to grab a bill image the same day that it's made available. It makes sure that you're paying things on time and processing your bills in a quick and efficient manner. While eBill has its definite advantages, it requires a lot of time of somebody on staff to actually go out and harvest those e-bills each month. If you're receiving several via email, that can quickly become overwhelming and hard to manage and be a resource constraint. It can require a lot of time for your team. In the early days of Conservice, obtaining an e-bill or setting up a login, that was all done manually. We had teams of people manually logging into a utility provider website and downloading a copy of the bill and then processing that through our system. Over time, we developed software that now does that automatically for us. It's really taken the pain out of obtaining an e-bill. The challenge with e-bill is the setting up and management of logins. It is time intensive, it's complex, and you have to jump through hoops and hurdles sometimes depending on the utility provider. There are providers out there, especially small municipalities, that don't necessarily offer an e-bill option, or if they do, it's not great. And so dedicating resources to the setup and management of logins will likely be the biggest hurdle to overcome in the management of e-bills. Now we automatically obtain utility bills each month for every account that we have set up on eBill. We also set up logins automatically for any new accounts that we manage. Step 3, track down missing bills. There's a million reasons why missing bills happen. So step 1 in identifying a missing bill is you need to understand when to expect the bill. And when you haven't received it, you need to be able to flag that. So in order to know when to expect it, you need to understand what day it's expected to arrive and how often that bill is expected to generate. And then when the bill doesn't show up, most often it's going to require a call to the provider in order to obtain the bill. Oftentimes when trying to obtain a missing bill, providers are going to send them out to you via paper mail. Sometimes that even requires a fax. Funny enough, they will require you to send a fax to them. Sometimes they will send a bill back to you via fax. A lot of the missing bills that we see come as a result of an account being set up on paper mail. Paper mail comes with its complexities. Missing bills is a big one. So likely when it comes to a missing bill, that's where you're going to spend the majority of your time. The need to identify and be proactive in hunting down a missing bill, it can require a lot of your time and a lot of your team's resources. In order to successfully identify and manage missing bills, there's a couple key components. And really, it's a calculation that you need to run in order to successfully identify when a bill is missing. And the things that go into that calculation are the bill date. So you know around what time each month a bill is going to be issued. The due date, so you know around what time each month a bill is due. The frequency of an account, so you know how often that bill is going to generate. Also, you need to know how the provider is paid. Collectively, with all those data points, you then have a firm understanding of the last possible day you can receive a bill in order to pay it on time. Missing a bill can result in multiple late fees. It can result in disconnects and other penalties on the account, potentially additional deposits issued to the account. So the process of both tracking, identifying, and proactively seeking bills is vitally important to the success of utility management. Step 4, categorize each bill. There's 3 things to keep in mind when thinking about categorizing a bill. Those are common area charges, charges associated to an occupied unit, and charges associated to a vacant unit. We categorize each bill and account into a couple different buckets for a few different purposes. The first is a common area. We identify when a bill or an account is associated to a common area. That helps us report back common area expense and consumption. We also categorize accounts and bills as an occupied unit. That allows us to provide transparency into expense and consumption specific to units that are occupied. In associating a bill to an occupied unit, we can help identify situations where vacant theft has occurred. Vacant theft is when a tenant is occupying a space and should have put utilities in their name, but they have not. The bill remains in your organization's name, and you continue to fit the bill for their utility expense. And lastly, we categorize bills as a vacant unit bill. That helps provide reporting and transparency into your truly vacant units. And that's important because if you have a vacant unit, you really should have minimal cost and consumption typically. And if that is varying, if that's spiking for whatever reason, it's important to know that. It's important to be alerted of that so that you can control your cost and consumption within that vacant unit. When it comes to categorizing it, I think we can talk about the need to separate common area expense from vacant expense, but really the thing that matters in commercial more than that even is GL coding. For many of our partners, GL codes are important because it helps them to categorize their expenses into different buckets. Most importantly, that includes CAM expenses and then expenses by each major utility, as well as understanding what expenses are related to vacant units. So you have an understanding of what expense you need to then recover from your tenants. Step 5, enter data. Utility bills have several data points on them. Without utility-specific software, it can be challenging to record all the data points you need from a bill, things like bill date, due date, service dates, the meter reads, taxes, charges, account numbers, meter numbers, rate schedules, units of measurement, the list goes on and on. Having all those data points opens the door to reporting, transparency, and analytics for what's occurring at each property or asset. The ability to store this data allows for the identification of potential issues at the meter level. As the data accumulates, it provides further insight into trends and behaviors on each account and meter. Step 6, review data entry. There are several opportunities for savings on a utility bill. Just as an example, we have a partner of ours who's been with us for 5 years. In that time, we've helped save them $198,000 in the review of their utility bills month to month. One example of something that we've seen not only with them but other clients of ours is a provider reporting the wrong meter read. In turn, that causes increased usage, which in turn causes increased expense, something that would obviously go unidentified if you're not reviewing your bills month to month. But if you are watching them month to month, that will quickly stand out. Typically, utility providers are willing to issue a credit when things like that are pointed out to them. However, if not pointed out, they have no reason to go back and correct those accounts. Once you've audited a bill and you've found inaccuracies in the data that you've captured or in what the provider has billed or invoiced to you, the process of then getting that resolved oftentimes requires a phone call to the provider. And those phone calls can be lengthy. You have to navigate lengthy menus, oftentimes sit on hold, and then at the end of the day, you're talking with somebody who can sometimes be frustrating to talk with and may not completely understand the situation that's going on your account. Nonetheless, it's the only way really to then resolve whatever issue has occurred on your bill is by placing a call to the utility provider. If you discover a data entry error, that needs to be corrected, especially if it has something to do with the expense that's been entered. Otherwise, you'll end up overpaying or underpaying the bill in hand. If the data entry error has anything to do with key dates, especially the due date, you potentially will pay the bill late, or the meter or account will be disconnected. The average provider-caused error is $22 and occurs on as many as 20% of bills. It takes time to identify or flag a potential error, and then it takes time to resolve the error because oftentimes that requires a call to the provider, and that can just be time-consuming. A call to the provider is going to take no less than 15 minutes, and that's a good phone call. Those can last sometimes over an hour. When it comes to resolving errors, the time it saves our partners on the phone with a provider is huge. And for somebody doing this in-house, usually their sole purpose is, I want to make sure we have the bill and I want to make sure it's paid. Auditing the bill is down the list, and oftentimes it doesn't occur. Ensuring the highest level of data integrity is important in capturing your utility bills. For some, especially those that do this in-house, they may not have a process at all to review the data that's been entered to ensure that it's accurate. Even with careful data entry, manual data entry errors occur on 30% or more of utility bills. Up to 20% of utility bills have provider-caused errors. So not only is it important to review bills that have been processed for errors that have potentially occurred when entering the data, but also to ensure the utility provider has invoiced you correctly. There's several different things that can occur on a utility bill as far as an error is concerned or a potential issue. Those include blatant billing errors from a utility provider. That can be a line item that was included erroneously. That can include meter reads that are inaccurate. Other potential problems can include water leaks that go unidentified, meters that are breaking down. When a meter breaks down, it typically slows down, and for a period of time, you'll be underbilled. And at some point, the provider will wise up to what's occurring, and they'll issue you a large back bill. So identifying those errors in real time potentially save you the pain of a large back bill. Step 7, resolve errors. If you have somebody doing this in-house, at the end of the day, you have a human entering bills, and they have the potential to fat finger bills. How are you identifying those problems? Another way to save even more on utility expenses by appropriately and legally billing common area utilities back to tenants. Current partners of ours formerly were doing this in-house or not at all, or they were billing it back through CAM at the end of the year. Moving to a monthly bill back provided a couple advantages, those being real-time monitoring of submeter issues, water leaks or other problems that are occurring at the utility level, high users. So you can save even more on utility expense by appropriately and legally billing common area utilities back to tenants. That comes with a couple key advantages. First of all, you're able to monitor your tenant's cost and consumption real time, month to month. On a manually read property, you're able to monitor that on a monthly frequency. If you have an electronically read or remotely read property, you're able to monitor that as frequently as daily. So you can identify potential water leaks or other problems within a unit on a daily frequency rather than waiting for monthly reads to occur and identifying problems at that time. Billing back utility expense to tenants on a monthly basis, in most instances, significantly improves utility recovery. For many of our partners, their goal is to recover 100% of billable utility expense, and that's hard to do when managing this process in-house. It takes a lot of time and resources in order to get that done. Auditing every bill that's processed each month comes with a couple key advantages that we've seen in our experience and a couple common errors that occur. Those include potential water leaks on site. They can go unidentified for months at a time if you're not looking at every bill that's processed, and you could be overpaying for utilities. You could have a meter that's breaking down. When a meter breaks down, it typically slows down. And when it does so, you'll be underbilled for some period of time. And at some point, the provider will figure that out and issue you a large back bill. Depending on your utility provider, they can erroneously bill you, and that can mean several different things. They can include a line item that's not supposed to be there. They can increase your rate out of the blue or unknowingly, among several other things that can occur. There are a variety of issues and errors that we see month to month that ultimately result in literally sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. Again, depending on the provider, depending on the number of accounts or properties in your portfolio. And the last step in the process, pay the utility bill. When it comes to paying a utility bill, one of the frustrating points can be how quickly a due date creeps up, or the window between when the bill is issued to when it's due. It oftentimes is somewhere between 10 and 14 days, so you need to make sure your process is very quick and very efficient beginning to end. And if you misstep anywhere along the way, there's a real chance you're going to pay the bill late. And that begins with obtaining the bill as quickly as you can. That's why e-bill is so advantageous. And it really speeds up the obtaining of the utility bill rather than waiting on that bill to come through the mail. You need to process the bill quickly. The data needs to make it into the system and through the process quickly. And then issuing payment to the utility provider. There are several ways in which you can pay a utility provider. Some utility providers still only accept a check, even though it's 2020. With those providers, you need to make sure you're issuing payment well in advance of the due date, and you need to know what providers those are that only accept check payments. You then need to understand what is the latest date possible I can issue payment in order for the payment to be made on time. In our experience, in the time it takes them to post a payment, some providers receive a payment and post that payment same day. Some providers receive a payment and post that payment literally weeks later. So if you don't understand that and you're not on top of that, you in all likelihood are paying late fees. It's definitely advantageous to use electronic payment methods whenever possible. That speeds up the payment process and again helps avoid late fees and other penalties that can occur on these accounts. The other challenge that is often encountered in paying a utility bill is misapplied payments. So if you're not descriptive in issuing a payment to a utility provider, and by that I mean providing a list of bills that you intend to pay with the payment that you've sent in, providers will issue that payment wherever they choose. So your payment may end up on a single account even though you had intended to pay 20 accounts, as an example. If you end up with a misapplied payment, that requires another phone call to the provider in order to remedy that situation and ensure that payments are posted to the intended bills. A misapplied payment can also require urgent rework of something that's already been done. So you've already made a payment on a bill and you thought that particular piece of work was complete, only to find out that the provider misapplied the payment and now it requires time and attention from whoever on your team manages that process, and it's something that needs to be done immediately. And while it may not be a big deal if that only occurs on a single bill, if that occurs on multiple bills, if there's multiple misapplied payments, that quickly becomes an even bigger resource allocation. If you end up with a misapplied payment, that requires another phone call to the provider in order to remedy that situation and ensure that payments are posted to the intended bills. If a misapplied payment occurs, oftentimes the best way to catch that, or the only way that you'll know, is a prior balance on the subsequent bill. You'll end up with a prior balance and it will be nondescript. It won't tell you where it came from. And the only way that you'll know that a misapplied payment had occurred is by contacting the provider and performing your own research. Again, you're on the phone with the provider, and that can be a time-consuming process. Now that we've reviewed 8 steps to lowering your utility bills, you're able to A, track utility bill arrival dates, B, retrieve bills, C, track down missing bills, and D, categorize each bill. How you apply the things we've talked about today will vary depending on your situation, but the overarching lessons are the same. For our current partners, at one time, they were doing this in-house, and it simply became too much for them to manage on their own, so they began looking for a utility management provider. And if you're in that situation and are looking for a utility management provider, here's a couple key things to look for. Look for a utility bill pay service with in-depth audit and issue resolution. An emphasis on increasing your return on investment. Tenant bill back, sub-meter installation, energy benchmarking, utility budgeting, and integration with MRI. Additionally, look for a company who also provides services such as rate audits and procurement. Look for a company that cares about you as a partner and provides great customer service. Additionally, look for knowledge and resources necessary to shop for the best electricity rates. Look for a provider that offers both tenant billing and bill pay services under one roof. Look for a partner that understands your needs from a sustainability standpoint and a partner who can grow along with you.